CDRI is a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, and the message that we want to give through this pavilion is that investing in resilient infrastructure is the smartest investment that one can make, because 75% of the infrastructure is yet to be built. So it is the nicest opportunity for us to invest in that. So in line with our this core messaging, we want to we are hosting a lot of session, and today we have Miss Judy Zakreski from International Code Council hosting a session on achieving resilience through right size codes and capacity building in the Republic of Marshall Islands. So I invite Miss Judy Zakreski on the stage to take us through this entire session. Most welcome.
Thank you, Cobalt, and thanks to the CDRI and the DRI Pavilion for hosting this session today. This is going to be a little unusual because I'm going to be having some conversations with pre-recorded videos. The colleagues that we've worked with in the Marshall Islands are not able to be at COP, and there's not a hybrid capacity here. So we're being very creative, and I'm going to start out by giving a little bit of background, and then I will bring them in on video with their interventions. So we do have us joining remotely Jamata Kabua Jr., who is the Assistant Secretary for the Ministry of Public Works, Infrastructure, and Utilities in the Marshall Islands, as well as Lobaj Kaminaga, who's a building code officer for the same ministry. We worked very closely with Jamata and Lobaj on developing the building code and on some follow-up work to build capacity for enforcement. And then joining me at the end will be Edie Ijaz, who is the lead coordinating author of the recently released report, CDRI report on disaster resilient infrastructure in small island developing states, and we'll have some reactions from him. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to start by giving a little bit of context about what the International Code Council does and how we tend to frame our approach to building codes and capacity building. So we are a non-governmental organization. We're based in the United States but work around the world. We are a membership-based organization with about 60,000 individual members. And the membership is important because the work that we do involves developing model codes. And you may wonder why an NGO in the United States develops model codes. It's because there's a unique constitutional construct in the United States that does not have that gives the states the police power, which includes regulation of health and safety, and that includes building codes. So it's not a national government function, as it is in every other country that I've encountered. So the states have the ability to regulate building safety in any way that they want. But as you can imagine, for interstate commerce, for people who want to design buildings in more than one U.S. state, or for materials manufacturers who are selling their products across state lines or nationwide, it's very difficult to not have some sort of uniformity. So going back over 100 years, there were 3 regional code development bodies in the United States that came together in 1994 to form the International Code Council and develop what has become the de facto national building code in the United States. It's still up to the states to adopt and implement those codes, and they make revisions to them. What we develop are model codes, so they are designed to be adapted and modified before they're implemented and enforced at the state level. But this construct results in the creation of building codes that are incredibly versatile. We update them on a 3-year cycle, which also means that they're very current, and they take into account lessons learned from disasters. They take into account new construction materials and methods of construction and new technologies. And we're updating the maps and the references to standards so that they're very modern, very current, and they're designed to be applicable to hazard conditions and climate maps that are in their original form, sort of as wide and broad as the United States. But globally, it's easy to overlay the hazard conditions of any country onto the factors that are in the international codes and modify it easily. So we work with many countries actually who use the international codes instead of starting from scratch. So using a model code and building upon it is an easy way to sort of jumpstart the building safety process. If you don't already have a code, it's easier to start from something and add or take away than to figure out how to develop a building code from the ground up. And the building code is really important because it helps to contextualize the standards. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get to that on the next page. But that's our main function, is to facilitate the development of the building codes. We don't write the building codes. We simply facilitate a process that enables anyone from around the world to contribute code change proposals. And then back to the membership, it's the members of the members of the governmental category that are able to vote on the code changes. And this is important because it allows not one single interest group to have an overly large say in what goes into the building code. So the codes are materials agnostic. Any kind of building material can be included as long as it's deemed to be safe. And it doesn't allow, any constituencies to have an overly large influence over what appears in the codes. So only the government members, who are the ones that are actually enforcing the codes, are the ones that can decide what is the final result of the code change proposals. In addition to developing the codes, we offer training and credentialing about the codes, related to the codes generally, but also related to some other general building safety topics. For instance, we have a course on evaluating buildings after a disaster event, and that applies to sort of, it doesn't matter what code you're using, you're still looking at the structural stability of buildings. So that's actually one of the courses that we offered in the Republic of Marshall Islands. We also offer product evaluation and testing and accreditation to help with the compliance infrastructure, the quality infrastructure, to make sure that there's an opportunity to test products that for compliance with the codes or reference standards, and accreditation for testing labs, building departments, and testing evaluation services. We have consulting services, which we deployed in the Republic of Marshall Islands. We consult often to help jurisdictions to update the model codes to the specific conditions and needs of their jurisdiction. And then we have software and technology also, which was deployed in the Republic of Marshall Islands. We have a pretty robust digital codes platform that allows for a lot of interaction between users in a specific group, but also includes an AI navigator to help with the understanding the codes and ease of learning where different aspects of the codes are, and a little bit sort of a shortcut onto finding the different provisions of the code that might apply to a specific project. So that is an overview of the ICC. So we really are focused on building safety beyond codes. And that informs, the next slide please, our view of the building safety regulatory ecosystem. This is a slide that we put together to demonstrate the very important message that building codes are critical. They're really important. They're a foundational part of ensuring safe buildings, but they must be underpinned by legislation that instructs how they are enforced, who has the various powers to enforce. They should be referencing standards. The codes tell you what needs to be done. The standards tell you how to do it. And this is really important because we see a lot of jurisdictions that are If you ask them about the building code, they say, well, we use this standard, or we use all of these standards. And standards are really important, and they're a critical tool. However, if there's no document instructing when a standard should be applied, the standards really exist in a vacuum. And in some cases, they can result in over-design, right? If you're looking at a standard that has some kind of, that's for fire stopping, if you look at a code, there are different rules for what kind of fire stopping method or system is required based on different occupancy types and different building types, different construction materials. If you don't have that context and you're just looking at the standard, you may be applying an overly stringent standard for fire stopping, which for safety is not a bad thing, but for affordability, it can make a big difference. And so the code really helps to contextualize the standards, where to apply the standards, and also gives instruction about how exactly a building should be designed and built. And so beyond the technical aspects of the building regulations, there's this whole area of capacity building, or of the ecosystem that enables compliance. So when a jurisdiction develops a building code, it's not an endpoint, it's really a beginning. It's usually a long process to get to having a building code, but that building code needs to be enforced and be implemented in order for it to actually result in safe buildings. So the building department administration and enforcement is also a really, really important part of this ecosystem. And all of this needs to be considered when you're developing the building code in the first place. Because if a building code is too complicated to be enforced, or it cannot be enforced based on the ecosystem that already exists, the building code needs to be imagined in the context of what is there now and what can be added to the ecosystem. You don't want to have an unenforceable building code, or have a building code and then not be able to do anything with it because you're waiting for additional funding, or you don't have any means to sort of build this enforcement ecosystem. And the ecosystem is actually really helpful in helping a local government, especially, to raise revenue. Because when there are inspections, when there's plan review and permitting, the building department can capture a fee for that, and that fee can be used to pay the salaries of the people who are doing the work and to underwrite the operations of the department. And so this is not necessarily a sunk investment for a jurisdiction. It's something that can be thought about within the context of implementing fees and requiring people designers, builders, materials manufacturers, to think about compliance and to increase the overall standards that are used in constructing buildings, resulting in a higher standard of buildings. Accreditation, product testing and inspection, and product compliance are also part of that quality infrastructure that help a jurisdiction to ensure that the products that are sold and used in the buildings in that jurisdiction are of high quality. And I was in a session earlier today at this pavilion talking about SIDS in general, but these functions don't need to cost the jurisdiction anything. And actually, a lot of these things can be outsourced to third parties. It only takes a regulation, and it doesn't cost a jurisdiction anything to regulate and to say, if you want to sell a product into this market, you need to prove that it's compliant with the code that we're using. And then the onus is on the manufacturer of that product to demonstrate that the product is fit for purpose. And the designers can understand what products are compliant and then specify those products. And so it's really just thinking through the whole system of how the codes are going to be implemented that enables this, this ecosystem to be established so that the building codes actually result in safer buildings and more resilient buildings. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'd like to now invite my virtual friend, Assistant Secretary Jamata Kabua, to provide an introduction to himself and provide some introductory remarks about the work that ICC did with the Republic of Marshall Islands in developing a building code.
Residents of the Marshall Islands face significant hazards, primarily driven by climate change, including frequent coastal flooding, severe droughts, and intense tropical cyclones. So the low-lying nature of our makes the country extremely vulnerable to these environmental threats. So as another part of our resilient efforts, Marshall Islands is implementing the first edition of its national building code, protect the people, property, and the environment from the unique risks of island life, particularly natural disasters and limited resources.
Okay, we're going back to the slides. Next one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we did, that Assistant Secretary Jamata was talking about with respect to customizing a building code for the Republic of Marshall Islands. Now, I mentioned in my earlier remarks that the codes that are published by the International Code Council are designed to be modified. They're model codes, and jurisdictions across the United States modify them. They're usually modified quite a bit more when they're used internationally, but it still provides a good baseline. In this case, the Republic of Marshall Islands hired ICC through our consulting service to develop a specific building code for the Marshall Islands that is contextually appropriate, but advanced and modern, based on the International Building Code. So the code was published in 2021, and it was based on the 2018 version of the International Building Code. RMI received the Ministry of MPWIU, Ministry of Public Works, Infrastructure and Utilities, received a grant from the World Bank. I think there was some Italian funding in there as well to have ICC and our subsidiary SK Ghosh Associates develop a code. It was updated from previous to this code. The Marshall Islands used a much shorter performance-based document. So it wasn't really a code, and it was more performance-based that didn't have prescriptive instructions about how to do things. So this is, it's quite different. It's much more robust, and we designed it to be much more user-friendly. A lot of the provisions from the original IBC were modified for the contextual conditions in the Marshall Islands, including the especially the structural provisions. We looked at the seismic conditions in the Republic of Marshall Islands, the wind conditions, typhoons, floods, high tide, sea level rise. All of that was taken into consideration in the design of this code, and which all of our codes are designed to address multi-hazard conditions, prioritizing which hazard category needs to take priority in designing the building. So all that is laid out in this building code. Next slide, please. Cobalt. Copal? Okay, next. Oh, okay. So that was only one slide? Can you go back one? Can you go back one? Yeah, okay. Then we're going to hear from Lobaj Kaminaga, the building official, who was very involved in the development of this 2021 RMI building code. So you can play the video, please. And, yeah, can you play his second video now, please? Thank you. Okay, so what exactly did we do to sort of right-size the code for the Marshall Islands? I've outlined it here on the slide. I'm not going to necessarily read through it, but a lot of times, all the time, the code needs to be modified to meet the local conditions. In the case of the RMI building code, it actually is fewer pages than the International Building Code, but it includes more provisions. So it's interesting. It's an interesting mix that makes it a little bit more user-friendly with everything sort of in one book. The difference is that the energy provisions, which in the ICC suite of building codes are in a separate code, the mechanical provisions, which again are usually a separate code, and the plumbing provisions are usually a separate code. So we took the key elements from the energy, mechanical, and plumbing codes and included them in this one single book. Normally, if you look at the IBC and look at the mechanical provisions, it's a few pages long and makes reference to the International Mechanical Code. But the ministry did not want to do that. They wanted it to be user-friendly, everything in one book, so we were able to do that for them. We took a lot of the seismic provisions out of the International Building Code. There's a whole chapter on seismic design, and instead we just referenced ASCE 7, which is a very, very commonly used design standard published by the American Society of Civil Engineers. And so it says for seismic design, refer to ASCE 7, and then people will go to ASCE 7 to learn about the requirements for seismic design. And then we also included residential provisions in this code. Again, in the context of the model codes, there's a whole separate code called the International Residential Code, which is very contextually specific to the United States and the kinds of residential construction that we have there. Not really appropriate for use, in my opinion, widely outside the United States. However, in the RMI, we included residential provisions. in their code that are appropriate to the kinds of residential construction that happens in the RMI. And then we added an appendix for local environmental conditions. So there's special treatment made for tsunamis, rain, and floods that are different in the island states than what we see in a continental context. And then we also included excerpts from the International Fire Code, which are related to, the fire code is for active fire operation, for fire department treatments of the building once the building is already constructed. But it does include certain fire service requirements, elevator inspections, a place for fire service to gather, and a control room in commercial buildings, as well as fire lanes. So all of that was pulled from the International Fire Code and integrated into the building code. And so it's a smaller book with a lot more information, perhaps maybe not as much detail, but it gives the basics and allows for this holistic thinking of how to keep the building safe. Can we go to the next slide? And so that was the work that we did in 2021. So the ministry's been sitting with this building code for a couple of years, digesting it, figuring out what they need to do to implement it. And so they came back to us this year, maybe at the end of last year, because they had received another batch of funding from the World Bank. And this was a very small project. And they said, we need help with implementation. What should we do? And so we looked at all different kinds of tools that they could use for implementation that ranged from training to sort of ongoing consulting services, to hosting the codes online, to creating user guides and essentials publications to help with the learning. We kind of had to prioritize and narrow down what was the most important. And so we ended up with developing, we encouraged the ministry to join the International Code Council as a governmental member. So that gives them the ability, if they want, to vote on the code changes to the model codes, which hopefully would become the model for them to update their existing code. We also, being a governmental member also gives them access to our code interpretation service. So we have engineers at ICC that will answer questions about the model codes for free. So, they phone a friend, kind of pick up the phone and ask the ICC engineers for code interpretations. So that we thought was a more cost-effective way for them to have access to code, to understand the code, rather than contracting our consulting team to be available for questions. And we did some really interesting training in the Marshall Islands. We did some very general training on the fire safety and accessibility provisions of the code, and we did a high-level introduction to the code for policymakers and other stakeholders within the environment to raise awareness of the building code as the ministry was looking to implement the code, starting with government buildings, then commercial buildings, public, and then residential. And we see this a lot around the world, where the implementation is kind of staggered based on the kind of building that it is. And so the ministry is taking that approach, which is a wise one, to start to understand how to implement it with the buildings that they actually own. And then as the capacity and the knowledge increases in the market, they're able to apply the code to other types of buildings owned by different organizations, and finally ending up in residential. We also did a training on when disaster strikes, for assessment after a disaster, and we did a really intensive 5-day training for plan review and inspection. So we spent time with the officials that will be doing the plan reviews and inspections of all of the buildings in the Marshall Islands, reviewed plans, taught how to use the code to review the plans, and then spent a day on site at a building and a construction site to look at how you would inspect a building based on the plans. And that was very, very well received, and I think very useful There was even interest in repeating the training to really build the knowledge. But that's really critical to ensure that the building code can be enforced. And so the improvements to date that the Marshall Islands has seen as a result of using the code, or what they're looking to achieve in the first round is, they want to ensure flood protection for ground floor houses, to tackle salinity from flooding, and also increase accessibility. Those are the priorities that have been articulated by the ministry. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, we're going to have Assistant Secretary Jamata talk about the capacity building needs that I just referenced as well. So he's going to give us a little bit of his take.
In the Republic of the Marshall Islands, which we Ferguson controlled around the National Building Code arose from the recognition that many stakeholders were not fully aware of its purpose, requirement, or long-term benefits. Although the code had been developed to improve safety, resilience, and sustainability, there were gaps in understanding, capacity, and implementation at the community and institutional level, which led to wide disagreement. First and foremost, our mine faces significant challenges as a low-lying island. We face increasing impact from climate change, such as coastal flooding, sea level rise, and stronger storms. In the beginning, there was only limited technical capacity among local builders, contractors, and inspectors, as well as very minimum complete awareness while building codes contribute to disaster resilience and sustainable development. And so these challenges meant that simply having a building code was not enough, and there had to be active support to promote understanding and practical use. And this is what I've been done to address such concerns. Through the contracts and collaborative efforts, the International Code Council and investing firms such as the World Bank, we have managed to conduct workshops and technical training for local engineers, builders, and government officials to strengthen knowledge of code requirements and inspection procedures. We are steadily raising public awareness campaigns such as community outreach, radio programs and announcements, and shared printed materials to explain how building safely protect families, homes, and livelihoods. We've also conducted several stakeholder collaboration meetings, bringing together government departments, SOEs, and NGOs to align on enforcement and efficacy. And these efforts have led to clear improvements with an increasing number of our government as well as the public understanding of the code's role in reducing disaster risk. Greater buying from local contractors and homeowners to follow safety construction practices. We are also improving the government capacity to enforce the code consistently going forward. Also, our communities are better recognizing and understanding that resilient buildings reduce loss and recovery time after storms and floods. And lastly, we are also slowly progressing towards integrating the code into broader national planning and climate adaptation strategies.
Thank you. Right, so this is a little bit of an overview that I gave you a preview. I probably don't have to spend that much time on this slide, but I talked about the governmental membership and the training that we offered. We also encouraged the ministry to subscribe to our Digital Codes Premium Complete platform. So we put their code on our platform, and so anybody can access it. It's free to view online, but it also has enhanced features for subscribers. And as part of this contract, they have a multi-year subscription for multiple users, so that everyone within the ministry will have access to the advanced features, which gives access to a lot of the reference standards all in one platform. includes the AI Navigator to help answer code questions. And our AI Navigator is very, very carefully trained on a very small set of information so that the accuracy is extremely high. I get a little bit scared of AI, and when you're talking about safety issues, and our AI Navigator simply navigates the code and can answer a question like an AI bot would, but it provides you with the actual code reference and takes you to it so that you have the proper original context. And so the ministry has access to that tool as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. I asked Assistant Secretary Jamata to talk a little bit about what the next steps are for the Republic of Marshall Islands in implementing their building safety ecosystem and what needs to be done to encourage use of and compliance with the codes. And so this is his response.
The next steps for the Republic of Marshall Islands is to strengthen the full implementation and enforcement of national building code across all stages of construction, starting with the government and public projects in Area 3, commercial projects in Area 2, and residential in Area 3, from design review, permitting, inspection, and occupancy. This will include finalizing and updating regulations and standards to align with regional and international best practices, especially in climate and disaster resilient construction. Secondly, building institutional capacity within the Ministry of Public Works and local governments, including training inspectors, engineers, and planners in code compliance, application, and enforcement. Also, raising public and private sector awareness through outreach to builders, architects, and communities about the importance of safe and compliant construction in the neighboring and outer islands, as well as integrating building code enforcement with broader resilience and land use planning efforts to ensure consistency across infrastructure and housing projects. And lastly, assuming our National Building Act is enforced, we will finalize our building permit-free structures and ensuring the fees are fair and affordable across the nation.
This process that the ministry is following for compliance is, in my opinion, very wise and very appropriate. It's something that it's a similar structure to what other countries that we've worked with have done when they're implementing a new code, and it enables. It takes a long time. You're not going from zero to full compliance overnight, but it really allows for the building of knowledge and capacity, so that and the gradual rollout to ensure that things are done correctly and to not overtax the system, to allow it to build gradually. So I truly applaud the Ministry of Public Works, Infrastructure and Utilities, and the work that Assistant Secretary Jamata and Lobaj have done along with their teams. And we look forward to working with them going forward. It's my opinion also that the code and the process that they followed is something that can be used as a model, perhaps repeatable in other Pacific Islands and other small island developing states. And hopefully he will agree with me, but I would like to invite Dr. Edie Ijaz to join me to have a bit of a discussion about this. And we can probably entertain questions from the audience if there are any, but...
Thank you so much, Yuri. No, excellent work. Look, when I was at the World Bank, I was responsible globally for all the work on the entire global portfolio on resilience. And we always look at the ICC as a really important partner for this kind of work. So seeing, and I knew that this grant was coming this way, so it's great to see now, years later, all the work that you have been doing with the RMI. Fantastic. There are three things that I especially like. First, is not just that ICC comes and imposes the code and does small modifications. You really went through a very structured review process because in the global north, they are not really incorporating necessarily salinity issues of typhoons. You don't see that as clearly, and it's such an important set of hazards for the RMI that is fantastic to see. Second, the simplification that you brought. You had actually more material in simpler form, so it makes a huge difference for countries with low capacity in that direction. And then the third step to come and say, look, we cannot stop at just the code, because that's such a common problem. Yes, we had the codes, but actually they don't get implemented. So that support for moving that direction makes a huge difference. So three things that I particularly like, and I'll link it to the work that we have been doing in CDRI, the Global Infrastructure Resilience Report, because one of the pillars of action that we did there is that we did the most comprehensive survey to date of more than 3,000 engineers and resilience professionals from more than 100 countries. And we cover a whole range of issues on resilience, but we have very specific questions on codes, standards, and regulations. Well, actually, the first question that we asked them is like, look, what is the most important thing the governments can do in resilience? Is it financing? Is it policies? Is it capacity building? Is it codes, standard, and regulation? And more than 50% of them said codes, standard, and regulations. And we asked them, look, do you have codes and standard regulation for resilience? 80% of them said, yes, we do. But then we asked, how many of those codes do you think are appropriate for the hazards you have in country? Only 20% said yes. And then we asked, what are the codes enforced? Seriously enforced, meaning is there an inspection system that is reliable? Is there remedies and fines for non-compliance? And that question was even worse, like 18% said yes. So you have a lot of work ahead of you, and we are counting on the ICC to help us in that direction.
Excellent, thank you. We look forward to doing that work, and I think, you know, we've seen the codes in other countries, sort of, and not only BI codes, but other codes from developed countries just kind of taken and plopped into an emerging economy, and you end up with a code that's like really, really difficult to enforce.
Absolutely. No, and the other thing that we were analyzing was we had a deep dive on institutions and governance for resilience and codes, because we saw such a strong response on the weaknesses of the implementation and all that. We began to say, okay, what are good practices out there? And what we see countries where this picks up is not when the government alone is the only stakeholder that is pushing for this. Countries where it's only inspectors going around and trying to force people, that doesn't seem to work. And therefore, what seems to have worked is where owners of buildings understand enough how important this is and will force the contractors to make sure that that's, because then they understand, if I don't build my house following the code, I'm absorbing the risk. And then in economies where you have a mortgage industry that gives loans for houses, that connection between the mortgage and the inspection makes a huge difference. You don't get a mortgage if you don't come here with an inspection. And third, when the insurance market has developed and then the insurance company says, no, you don't have an inspection that certifies that your house is built according to this, then we're not doing it. Once you start having all of these stakeholders rowing in the same direction, as we are saying, then it's very difficult to do. A government alone, unless it's extremely active, it doesn't work in that process. And I like the capacity building program that you began to do, because that's what you, at the end, in many of these communities, with the exception of the big government buildings or the high rises or all that, a lot of the other buildings, in many cases, are built by masons, a group of three, a crew of 3 or 4, and they need to understand the code. They need to know what it means in this situation. They need to know simple things on how do you connect the beams and the columns and all that. That kind of very practical know-how is what makes all the difference.
One of the things that that the ministry did was they looked at, we have a publication that's sort of an illustrated building code guide, and it's an outdated, well, no, it's not outdated. It's I think we do have the version that they needed, but they have access to that document now. It's based on the IBC, but because their code is a derivative of the IBC, there's a lot of provisions that are applicable. And so we made sure that that document was in the library that they have access to on our Digital Codes Premium platform. They also, we also gave them sort of the editable version of the RMI building code so that they could develop derivative works. They can use it to make a user guide, an illustrated user guide, or an illustrated training program, so that they have access to that intellectual property that and allows them to make those derivative works. We can certainly do that for a jurisdiction, and maybe we will work with them on that in the future. But I think looking forward in other SIDs, particularly for a regional approach, we would really like to look at sort of an even more user-friendly, I don't want to say simplified, more user-friendly building code that is much more illustrated.
Yeah, because, and I think that there are good lessons out of the large post-earthquake reconstruction program. Going back to Pakistan, the Nepal earthquake, the Haiti earthquake, where the agencies, financing agencies that began to help the government and the government itself realized that they needed fast reconstruction, but that they couldn't reconstruct all those tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of housing units, and therefore they needed a ramp up of capacity to train masons in ways that they would reconstruct houses, many of them low-income houses, following serious earthquake protection standard codes. And therefore, I think that, and I don't see, I see governments not necessarily learning from those intense post-reconstruction efforts and using that same practical guides that, as you say, are in a way cartoon-based practical guidelines that then translates into the implementation for very practical reasons. And actually in those implementation programs, what they do is that they do payment upon inspection. And many of them has 3 inspections, and you don't get paid the grant if you are not doing that. And because the grant is paid not to the contractor, but to the family, and then the family understands that actually unless they are checking the contractor, they don't get the subsidy. It provides the right incentives in that process. But that becomes a really critical part of the direction.
I think that's important, maybe more important for self-built kind of residential construction.
Absolutely. And remember that in many developing countries, the majority of housing is either self-built or is built by masons from the community that are not necessarily trained in that process, and therefore figuring out how to support those low-income communities so that they, because they invest a proportionally much higher share of their income in their houses, and it's a gradual process, so that they, what is such an important portion of their wealth is protected. And therefore, the other angle that I wanted to chat a little bit with you, that many countries are struggling, is with retrofitting. Because many countries, especially middle-income countries that have built so much on government buildings, on commercial buildings and the like, began to realize that actually their old codes are not up to par with the understanding and the knowledge in that direction, or they were built with insufficient quality or insufficient inspections. And therefore, what are you doing in ICC on retrofits in that direction? What is your advice on that to countries?
We haven't done a lot of work in retrofitting in emerging economies. we have an existing building code, which is it really is a map or a roadmap of what kind of changes and what portions of the code back to the building code do you need to follow based on what kind of work you're doing and how much percentage of the building are you retrofitting. So that code, all of the international codes are available for free to view online on ICC's website. And so an emerging economy or a SIDS like the Marshall Islands could refer to that document and then use that as a roadmap, a tool to refer back to their national building code to kind of understand if they understand what needs to be done to the building. And that's a different kind of process, right? If you need to identify what is wrong with the building that needs to be corrected, then maybe you need a structural engineer on site or to figure out what needs to be corrected on the building. But once you know that, that process is not necessarily a function of the building code. Then you can map out what needs to be changed, how much of the building needs to be changed, and then refer back to the new code.
Yep.
Right? Even if it was built to an old code, you can see, this building, this flood protection is insufficient, this mechanical system is insufficient, this is not structurally sound. How do we reinforce it? How do we retrofit? And for that, you can then refer back to
Absolutely.
what the current code is.
No, and I think that my sense is that in many countries, the same set of very practical guidance that you need to develop for new construction, you eventually will need to develop for retrofitting the process. How do you enforce that direction? And also, no matter how strong you build your buildings, there will always be disasters that go over those standards. There will always be floods that will overwhelm the flood protection system. There would always be salinity intrusion that we had never thought of. The sea level rise may change, and therefore figuring out also how do you deal with that intermediate process that is not full destruction, but is not, but it has overwhelmed the code in a way. I think that is going to be more and more common with climate change and the realities that many emerging economies don't have sufficient resources to have a very high level of protection for those processes. So I think that that's an area that I think is going to be emerging in that direction.
That's a good point, and your suggestion about the retrofit guide is a good suggestion either. I'm going to take those back to the technical team. I think the second thing that you mentioned in terms of overwhelming the system, one of the things that's valuable about using a code rather than just using a handful of standards is that the code starts with occupancy classifications and the use and the type of building and maybe can help to overlay a risk-based approach, and so that maybe you're spending more and fortifying more the buildings that have the highest value or need in a disaster scenario.
Exactly.
Right? Like a school that could be used as a storm shelter, or hospitals that need to continue even after the disaster happens. And so more focus on making sure that those buildings are extra resilient, can help to, at least from a government perspective, from the government buildings, those buildings can be designed to a higher standard.
Absolutely. The other message that we were putting in the global infrastructure report is not necessarily for people, well, also for buildings, but for other types of infrastructure, is that the most important resilience measure you can have, the most cost-effective, is good maintenance. Making sure that your structure, that the ditches are clean before the rainy season so it doesn't get flooded. Making sure that you're not having exposed steel that then start getting corroded because little earthquake, that thing is gone. And therefore, we are trying to make the message that it's not only important to look at codes for new structures, code for retrofits, but the very practical maintenance that ensures that in a way those structures are still operating to what they were supposed to do with the code. So I think that that's another area that we'll need to figure out how to do in a way, I don't know, codes for maintenance, if I can say.
We do have we have one of those. We have the property maintenance code that dictates how frequently the building needs to be inspected for various
Exactly.
areas.
And when we are talking to global North OECD countries, their challenge is that question of the retrofit and the maintenance, because it's been protracted years after years of not investing enough in maintenance and enhanced maintenance, and climate change changing the conditions and the risk profile of the hazards that they're undertaking, and therefore they're struggling. They don't have enough funding, and therefore what we developed actually with the report is a series of tools to say, how do you do risk assessment? Because you don't have enough money to fix every structure all at the same time. Therefore, where are the priorities? How do you go about that process? And I think that something like what you're saying, that the building maintenance code is actually going to be a critical part of getting serious about this process. Very good.
Great. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I said, Yuri, ICC, a fantastic partner. We look forward. I think that we need more of your work. We need you to be even better funded. You need to figure out how to really develop these tools and accompany countries, because this is, as you said in the RMI, you didn't do that in 3 months. It's a multi-year process that is not just developing the code, it's developing the capacities of the stakeholders, it's developing the understanding of how important this is, as it is really that continuous process of expanding, prioritizing, and investing, so that countries, communities, businesses, households are truly resilient to disasters. Thank you for the invitation. Great talking to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all of you for joining us, and thanks for all of you watching the recording.
Thank you.